You see him? Clancy asked Roger. The two of them crouched behind the fence. Shut up, or he's going to hear us, Roger hissed, pressing his eye to the splintery wood. It was after sunset, and if their mothers realized they weren't home yet, the boys would be in big trouble. They didn't care, though. They wanted to look at this mysterious fella who lived in the creepy old house at the end of the block. The one who only came out after dark. Thomas Baldhu was known to almost everyone in Chambliss. It was a small town, a town built on coal and lumber, and the population was roughly 20,000. As such, the large and foreboding house at the end of Fortner Lane stood out like a sore thumb. In a town of mostly trailers and ranch homes, the house in question was Balo Place, and it loomed like a gargoyle at the end of the cul-de-sac. No one knew how long it had been there, but some of the kids had seen a picture of the old manor in old paintings from the early days of the town. They say it had been occupied by the town's founder, and when he'd been arrested after a string of children had gone missing, someone new had taken up residence there. Someone who only came out after dark. The mob hadn't waited for justice to be served, it was said. They had dragged Thomas from his cell and beheaded him in the street, something that was the custom in certain places. Afterwards, the townspeople had wanted to go and see what sort of things the town founder had in his now empty home. But when the lights kept coming on and strange figures were seen around the grounds, they thought the magnificent manor might be haunted. They assumed it would eventually fall to pieces without someone to take care of it, but instead, the house remained, and even seemed to thrive under the care of whoever owned it. People had seen a shadowy figure making changes to the home for years, maintaining the grounds and fixing the damage to the ancient three-story, but no one had ever met him. That was 100 years ago, and as the town grew, the house remained as a mystery within Chambliss. No one in town still believed the house was haunted, but they knew someone was living there. Whoever they were extremely reclusive. When people came to the house, no one ever answered the door. If you approached the person while they were in the yard, they would always retreat inside. No one knew who they were or what relation they might be to the old founder. But they did know one thing about the owner of the house, and that was that he loved Halloween. The owner of the house may not be social the other 364 days of the year, but on Halloween, they threw the gates open and passed out the choicest candies and the best tricks. As the boys watched, the yard was already being prepared for the coming holiday. The front porch was festooned with pumpkins. The yard was set with gravestones and half-buried caskets, and the cobwebs and bats were thick in every tree. The trees in the yard always looked skeletal, despite how much attention was paid to the lawn, and they added to the aesthetic of the home. No one could be sure, but everyone was pretty sure the creepy nature of the homestead was intentional. The wood was dark, painted a deep brown, and stained like dark chocolate. The windows always glowed with something like candlelight, and the house just seemed to lean malevolently. Beyond those gates, it was Halloween every day for whoever happened to live there. "What's he doing?" Clancy asked. The crack he was peeking through wasn't very wide, and Roger had the better vantage point with the knothole. "He's filling orange bags with leaves for yard jack-o'-lanterns." "How does he see?" Clancy asked, the scritch-scratch of the man's rake constant as he collected up his medium. "Dunno. He doesn't even have the porch light on. Maybe he's raking by pumpkin light." Clancy wanted to look up over the fence, but he didn't dare. Both boys assumed the man would just leave if he thought they were watching, but you could never be sure. When Clancy's mother called his name, the boys stiffened like a goose had walked over their graves. They could see the person in the yard stiffen too, looking in the direction of the call as he turned to the fence. In the gathering shadows, they could see that he was dressed in jeans and a sweater, clothes that would look as acceptable for yard work as they would for a homeless man. The garments hung off of him, his body thin and emaciated, and people in town thought he might be sick. His voice, however, did not match his appearance. The voice everyone heard when they did business with him was rich, cultured, and full of vigor. Many of the women secretly held affection for him, saying his voice sounded like one of the men from the romance novel covers they all read, while their husbands were at work, of course. They would have to imagine what his face might look like, though, because he never came into town. He would call the local businesses and tell them he needed supplies delivered to the house about twice a year. Wood, decorations, candy, various and sundry things that he used to fix up the house or to get ready for the holidays. He never called the grocer or the butcher, however, and people weren't sure what he was eating up there. Whatever it was, it kept him going, and he continued to tirelessly work on the house and the grounds by moonlight. "Roger!" came the shrill cry from farther down the block. "Roger, it's past curfew, boy. You'd better get home before your dinner gets cold." "Crap," Roger said, taking his eyes off the yard as he turned back towards the house. "She sounds mad." "We better go," Clancy whispered, feeling very exposed by the pool of illumination from the streetlight overhead. "Yeah, might be a..." "Are you boys quite all right?" said a cultured voice from behind them. Both boys jumped like someone had lashed them with a belt. They looked back, shaking as the shadow of the stranger fell across them. In the gloom of the yard, he had appeared to be a large, thin man, but now he loomed over the boys like a giant from a fable. Both had barely gotten a good look at the stranger before the lamp overhead popped and left them standing in the gathering darkness. Both yelled in terror, scrambling away from the fence as they beat feet up the street for home, as startled by the lamp as the man. He watched them go, his face obscured by the gloom, except for his eyes. Both boys would swear later that they had seen 2 red flickers where his eyes should be. Both boys would also swear that his head had been a grinning skull until the day they died. "It was probably just a mask, Roger," Clancy said as they walked to school the next day. He could still feel the sting his dad had put into his bottom for being out past dark, and his mother had scolded him for bothering the nice man who lived at Baldhu Place. "He's never hurt anyone, and he'll never feel like he can introduce himself to the neighborhood if you kids keep bothering him." She had colored a little as she said it, and some of the snap in his father's hand could have been because he'd noticed. Many of the men in town were hoping that the mysterious man would stay in his house and leave their wives to their daydreams. "Mask nothing," Roger said. "That was a skull with 2 red eyes. You and I both saw it." "I don't know," Clancy hedged, not wanting another whipping from his dad for bothering people. His dad had been passed up for another promotion at the paper mill, and he was ornery these days. His mom had tried to console him, saying he'd get it next time, but he'd been sitting in the den with a case of beer in a foul mood lately. "What I know is that someone with a skeleton for a head is living in our town, and we should let people know about it." "Yeah?" Clancy said skeptically. "How are we going to do that? Mr. Baldhu never comes out or lets people see him, so how are we going to do anything?" "Just so happens we all need him to come out. In 2 nights, Mr. Baldhu will open his gates and let kids in to trick-or-treat. He always has a spooky display where he hides so he can give people a good scare. If we can get close, we can snap a picture and get proof. You still got that instant camera?" Clancy nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, but if I break it running away, my mom will literally kill me. It was a Christmas present." "We won't break it," Roger assured him. "Once we get proof, we'll be heroes. Imagine how cool we'll be if we snap a picture of the ghost that haunts Baldhu Place." Clancy thought about it, and as he thought of the kids at school chanting his name, he decided that it might be worth the risk. He and Roger would be legends, and a reputation like that could take them all the way to middle school. "What's your costume this year?" Roger asked, though it sounded like it didn't matter. "I got a cardboard box robot that I made last year," Clancy said. His dad had helped him make it last year, back when he was in a better mood, and Clancy had added a little more spray paint the following week. That had earned him a loud scolding from his dad, too. Apparently, he had used the good spray paint and not the cheap crap that he had bought for him last year. Clancy had said he was sorry and finished up with the other can. It looked good now, and the thought that he might not wear it made him feel a little sad. It would surely be too small next year. I got another ninja costume from my grandma. She gave it to me for my birthday last year. Mom bought me a new one without thinking about it, and if we go as ninjas, we can make a hasty retreat once we get the picture. The logic was sound to Clancy. Ninjas would be faster than a clunky box robot, and he agreed to meet at Roger's house on Friday night. Bring your camera, and don't be late. I want to hit a few houses before we get to the big prize. It was edging up on 9 o'clock when the boys got to the gates of the Baldhu place. A few houses had turned into a 3-hour tour of 6 different neighborhoods, and when Roger realized what time it was, he'd said a word that would have made Clancy's mom wash his mouth out with soap. The boys had run back to their neighborhood and left their candy at Roger's house before heading out again. Roger's mom had asked if they didn't have enough candy, but Roger said they had one more house to hit before they packed it in. We got to get candy from the Baldhu place. He always has the best treats in town. She had told them to be quick, and the 2 ninjas had headed back into the night. Now that they were standing here before the lair of the beast, Clancy was feeling a little unsure of the plan. Let's just go back, Roger. We've got enough candy. We don't really need to. But Roger stepped into the yard like he hadn't even heard him. Roger intended to get his treat this year. Clancy was left with no choice but to turn around or follow after, and his loyalty to his friend was too great to back out now. The yard was set up like a graveyard, and as they walked towards the house, Clancy jumped as a zombie lurched out of a coffin that had been set up next to the gate. He growled and roared before descending back down again to get ready for the next victim. Roger laughed as the kid in the ghost costume jumped in time with Clancy, glancing around to make sure that he was the last before proceeding. It was late now, and the boys were the last 2 left on the property. If they were going to make their move, now would be the time. They made their way up the sidewalk, graves erupting to reveal zombies or skeletons that popped out with a mechanical growling noise. He was really going all out this year, it seemed, and the boys expected a grave to contain the mysterious Mr. Baldhu at any minute. He would come stomping out, dressed as a skeleton or a zombie, and they could trick him into bending down so they could snatch his mask and reveal his face. Clancy was ready with his camera, and Roger had seen him snap several panic shots as they went. The closer they got to the house without encountering him, the more their nerves jangled. With every crackly mechanical growl and yowl that split the air, the boys' trepidation rose, and as they mounted the stairs to the house, they felt a cold chill run up their backs. They had come midway when the door to the house opened, revealing a rocking chair with a headless body seated in it. It held a bucket of candy in its lap, the chair creaking menacingly with every sway of the occupant. "Get the camera ready," Roger whispered, sneaking up to the chair. Clancy nodded, standing just inside the door as he tried to stop his knees from shaking. Roger came up to the bowl, his eyes boring into the headless thing as he reached into the mound of candy. He expected the jump, expected the scare, but he never expected the direction it might come from. Clancy watched through the little window, hands shaking as he waited to snap the picture. All at once, Roger shot his free hand for where the head should be on the rocker, trying to find its head. Should be right below the neckline, an easy grab, but as Roger patted the spot, he found it solid, crying out in pain as something took hold of his rooting hand. He had been so intent on the shoulders, he hadn't bothered to take his hand out of the candy bowl. Now, something had a hold of it, and Roger was afraid it would tear it off. "Clancy! Clancy, help me!" he yelled, but the door slammed shut then, sealing their fate. As the man stood up, Roger pulled his hand free of the bowl, and Clancy screamed in terror as the bloody skull chomped happily at it. It was an old skull, the bones red with blood, and the teeth were turning red as Roger's fingers were ground beneath them. Roger shook it only once, the pain too great to have it move much, and when the meaty snap washed over the boys, the skull hit the ground with nearly half the finger still in his mouth. Roger fled, pounding on the door as Clancy sputtered and cried for someone to help them. His camera flashed a few more times, but what it caught was anyone's guess. When the body bent down to get the head, tucking it under its arm, the skull seemed to tut as it worried down the finger into its non-existent throat. "Terribly sorry, boys. I know it's bad manners and a touch barbaric, but Bloody Bones here does love his treats on Halloween. I've had to limit him. Missing children do make such a fuss. But," the skull said, as its bones turned up abnormally, "Halloween is such a hectic time. Sometimes children go missing for one reason or another." The boys cowered as he came towards them, but their screams fell on deaf ears as Bloody Bones and Rawhead went about their business. The boys were searched for, but never found. The police came and searched Baldhu Place, but they never found the boys or its mysterious owner. Baldhu Place continues to stand to this day, and every Halloween there's a grand event with candy and decorations. Supplies are still delivered, the bills are always paid, and children sometimes go missing. No one could know that when the townspeople beheaded Thomas Baldhu, they would create a legacy that would outlast even the town. None of them could have known what they created with the swipe of a simple axe, or how it would haunt the town forevermore. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.